Welcome back, everybody. Bradley here. One of the questions I get asked quite often is, what colors do you paint first in the design that's on a body? It's pretty simple. What I always tell them is I always cut the thinnest lines first. Doesn't really matter about what color it is, but I always cut the thinnest lines and paint the thinnest lines first. And I'll explain to you why I do it. There's several different reasons for it, and I think it's going to help you out if you're new to using the liquid mask and you're not really quite sure what to paint by. Okay. Back in the day, a rule of thumb, as people always said, and we always went by, we got to paint the darkest colors first. Okay. Back in the day, we had to do that because they were a different type of paint. They were more of a lacquer base or an enamel or acrylic, and you had a lot more possibilities of paint bleeding through the other colors. So back in the day, yeah, it did make a difference, and we have typically tried to paint the darkest colors first. Nowadays, with the airbrush paints that we use, we're mostly using water-based airbrush paints. Here's the Createx, there's Proline, there's a lot of different varieties that are out there, but they're still water-based paints. These paints don't typically have the tendency to bleed through like the old lacquers, the acrylics, and the enamels did, okay? There are other paints out there that we use with the water-based paints that may bleed through. There's the spastic paint, and there's a couple different brands that are out there that you have to be more careful with. If you do use those colors and you like to use those colors, by all means, please adhere to what they tell you to use for like their bleed blockers or their backers that they use with those paints, because you're still susceptible to getting some of that bleed through because they have different dyes and different pigments in those paints. So what we'll be talking about basically is the water-based paints, which 99% of the colors that I use are the water-based paints. So with that being said, I always cut the thinnest lines first when you're doing the design, and when you come down to paint it, you'll have the whole entire design cut out first. Okay, you don't want to take the design and cut out just part of it and then paint it and go back up and try to look through what you've already painted to cut the next set of lines out. You'll want to have the entire body cut out all the way through it. So when you come down to paint, you don't have to worry about looking through any of the other colors that are underneath it to paint it. So make sure you have the entire design cut down first. And then what you'll want to do is you'll want to pull off the thinnest lines first. Here's an example of some bodies that I'm doing now. It's got some tribal flames on it, some scallops on the end, and then also the window trim, okay? On this particular body, they're going to be silver, but you could use a white, you could use a yellow, you could use a fluorescent pink, you could use whatever color that you wanted to use it, and it won't bleed through. And what I'll show you is when you're doing it and you're applying it, it doesn't matter what color it is, you've always got the option to back that color, and what I use is black. Okay, so you'll still paint the color, the thinnest line. If it's a white, you'll put your 2 coats of white on there like you would typically paint it. You would use a hair dryer between coats to make sure it's dry, and then you would come back and you would just lightly dust a black behind that white, or even fluorescent yellow or any other color. You can use black as also like a bleed blocker because it's water-based paint. It's not like an enamel or a lacquer or an acrylic that's going to bleed through. So it doesn't matter what color you're going to want to paint, just paint the thinnest lines first, okay? Another reason why I always paint the thinnest lines first, it's the most difficult line to paint. If you are going to paint a bunch of different colors on it and you started out with a bigger portion, what happens is you're now burying those thin cuts inside the paint job, okay? You may look like you're getting a lot of work done, but what you've done now is you've made the hardest part to pull out those thinnest lines after you painted several different colors of paint. And it's a lot harder to look in and physically see those lines and pull them out. By painting the thinnest lines first, what you've basically done is just created a bunch of islands in all these different portions of the body where it's a lot easier to pull the mask off from front to back instead of having to try to find and dig through those sharp lines inside of the paint job, okay? The other thing that I like to do too is, and I see other painters, you know, they'll leave the design on there with a Sharpie marker, and I always ask them, and I wonder, you know, why do you leave the Sharpie marker on there? And there's all different types of answers. A lot of people say, well, I leave it on there because that way now I can see where my cuts are at. I know where the paint stops and the next color starts. If it works for you and it turns out great how you want it, by all means, don't change it. What I'm trying to help is the new person that's trying to start out and paint and understand is, don't make it difficult on yourself because now you're trying to dig the thinnest lines out of a couple different layers of paint. Black, for example, that you're going to have a really hard time picking those thin lines out. So When you're done cutting the body out, I remove all of the Sharpie marker that has the design on it, okay? I can kind of see by looking at it where all the islands are at and where the colors are going to be at on it. If you struggle, and what I use for an example on this one here is, you can use just a basic Sharpie marker. Once you get to this point and all the other design is, Sharpie is erased off the body, go back with your Sharpie marker and just write on the outside. Like for example, this body, we're going to be using hexes here. You write hex in there. You can write down, the window trim and all the other lines are silver. Then the back, we're going to have pink going into some red splatters. The front's yellow to orange. So you can write on the outside of it with a Sharpie marker, and it'll also kind of help tell you where your colors are going to be at on the design. If you don't erase your Sharpie marker on the pattern, what inevitably happens is on the back of these spikes here, when they go to pull that off there, you're always going to get a curly Q. If you're not good at making your cuts complete to where they come to a point, when you go to pull these off, you're going to have a little tail on it, okay? With a Sharpie marker that's left on that design, that tail is buried in that Sharpie marker. You can't physically see if that's a clean pull or not. So you don't have any options to go back and correct those tails, okay? Like for example, on these spikes or the edges of these flames, if you were to still have your Sharpie marker on there and you pull it off, the only time you're going to see that tail there is when your paint job's totally complete and you go to peel the film off at the very end. You're going to see where that tail was missed. By doing it this way, it gives you the opportunity to hold it up in the light. People usually cut over a light board, or they use a headlamp, or whatever light source you use. It's very easy to see it when you're pulling these lines off at this stage. The thinnest lines you're always going to see if you've got anything that's slightly off on the tail and it doesn't pull right, or something lifted up on the film because you didn't cut it all the way through. It gives you the opportunity to fix it, and you can see it instead of waiting till the very end when you get the paint job done and you peel the film off and now you see all these loose tails. By then you can't fix it, okay? My theory is if you're going to do a design and you're going to have really thin, crisp, sharp lines, you want to do everything you can in the painting process to keep those lines as clean as possible, okay? If you don't catch it then, it's too late and you're going to notice at the very end, okay? When you are backing any of these first colors, whether it be white, fluorescent yellow, or whatever you're using, when you paint it with a black, all you need to do is dust it, okay? When you see it just lightly getting to the point to where it's black, you don't need to put any more on it. There's no need to flood a heavy amount of black on there and risk the chance of any of it bleeding through there. You just want to do light dusting coats, okay? Also, when you're doing that, is when you're shooting the black, just don't get a big wide spray pattern on your gun and just start it and cover the whole thing. You want to try to keep any of these little thin cut lines as visible as possible. And by that, what I'm saying is when you start putting layers of paints over it, you're starting to bury those cuts inside of the paint job, and it's going to make it harder for you to pull that next color off. So when you're backing it, just keep in mind, use light dusting coats also to help back it so you don't get any bleed through that's on it. So hopefully a few of these tips will help you when you're trying to do some of those designs. I know a lot of people, this may be a little bit further down the road, but something to keep in mind and a good practice to start learning when you're starting to paint, because if you do those thinnest lines first, regardless of whatever design, you're going to have a lot better chance of success and not having those small little tails and mistakes happen in it. So hopefully that will help you out. If you have any questions, by all means, shoot me a message and I'll get back to you and reply on your comments. Also remember to like my Facebook page and this YouTube page so we can keep these paint jobs and videos coming for you. Thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next one.